Today we're going to talk about two specific things. The first one, we will discuss Node module system. In the second part, we will discuss scalability. How do we scale Node? How the I/O multi-thread system work? And we will learn how to solve the blocking problem, which means if for any reason you really want to process something that's CPU bound operation, an operation that require a lot of CPU uh, computation, then we see what is the best way to do that. And we will learn how to resolve this problem. For the first part, we will discuss node module system. Now, when Node project started, we did not have in JavaScript any modules or module specifications. So the guy who invented Node, his name was Ryan Dahl. This guy looked up around and found that there is a good module system around called CommonJS. And he included this as a way to create modules in JavaScript. Until a few years back, now JavaScript does have native module system, which is ESM, ECMAScript's module system. Now the syntax for these two module system is quite different. So in here we use require methods to import a module, and in order to expose everything in a file is private, and if you wanna provide public access to a certain object in your file, you will have to use a syntax called module.exports. Now, since JavaScript language has evolved and we do have native ECMAScript modules specifications, we will no longer use the legacy CommonJS module system. Instead, we will use the standard JavaScript module system, which has a syntax of import and export. Export, you export something, or export default something. We have two types of exports. And we have import, which is import from. And import acts in a way I'm going to explain it in details next. So when you're trying to read any documentation or you're trying to look at examples, you're probably still going to see some examples are using the require syntax and module exports. I highly recommend that you convert all of this to ECMAScript module system and use the new syntax, the standard syntax, I would say. And I will show you how you can convert this to this shortly in the demo. Now, when we talk about module system, we have kind of 5 types of modules. The first part is the core modules. And probably there was a question in the homework yesterday, what are core modules like HTTP, file system, path, util? We have many modules shipped with Node installation. When you install Node, it comes with Node. And this is the first type of modules that you can import in your app and start using. Second types of modules is the modules that you create. So it's user modules, which is simply files that you create with extension .js or .mjs. And these types of modules is modules that you create, for example, for a service, for a controller, for a model, and you use in your application. These are user-created modules. Now, the other types of modules are third-party modules. These are modules created by other people. Someone on the internet, they uh, solved a certain problem, and they published their code online that you could download, add to your application, and start using. But before you can start using any third-party module, you would need a tool called NPM, which is the Node Package Manager. Now, you're probably wondering, why do I need package manager and all this stuff? Well, to solve the dependency problem. Yes, you could always grab a JavaScript file, download this file into your computer and use it. But that's not ideal. Why? Because what if this JavaScript file has bugs and later they were fixed? How could you just go back online and download the new file? If you have like 100 dependencies, that would be very hard when you build applications. And what if this JavaScript file depend on 3 other JavaScript files? And this JavaScript file depend on other 5 JavaScript files. So to keep track of dependencies is hard. That's why we need a tool like NPM to solve all the dependencies and outdated packages for you. And with third-party modules, we also have 3 types of modules. The first one is code dependency, code module. The code module is a module that you download, install, and you use. Usually it stays in a folder called node modules. We have another type of modules called dev module or development module. These dependencies also, when you install them via NPM, they live inside node underscore modules folder, and you can use while you are developing your application. For example, you want a package that tests your code. This is not a package that you're going to use in your application. You're only going to use it in development machine to test certain functionality in your application. Third type of modules are global modules. And global modules, you cannot find them inside node modules folder. They are installed in some sort of global folder into your machine. And it's different between operating systems and versions of operating systems. So check the documentation if you'd like to find them. And these dependencies, you cannot import them. So if you install any package in a global way, you cannot import this module because they don't live with your code. So what's the purpose of this global module if I cannot use it in code and I cannot find it in my project? Well, global packages, global modules are tools. They provide you with command line executable that you can run to do some changes to your project or to compile a project or to generate files for your project. So a global module is simply a tool that provides you with the command line executable file that you run in order to accomplish some tooling for your project. So this is a run over everything that's in regard to modules in Node.js. And we will demo every single part, how they work next. Any questions so far? Let me repeat. So we have two specifications for modules. For all of these modules, we have two specifications. CommonJS, which use require and module.exports. We will not be using these because it's legacy. It was created because JavaScript didn't have native modules. Now, since JavaScript does have native modules, we will be using import and export default syntax to use the modules. Types of modules are, we have core modules and user modules. Core modules come with Node. We will immediately import them and use them. User modules are files you create with extension.js or .mjs. And we have third-party modules also split into three parts. First one is code dependencies and development dependencies. Both of these, when you install them via npm, they live within your code inside a folder called node modules. You can import them and use them. And a third type of dependencies called global dependencies. You also install it with npm, and you cannot import these, and you cannot find it inside node modules. The goal for this is just to provide tooling via the command line into your project. Let's now have a demo. So in my demo, I'm going to create a folder here. I'm going to call it demo. And within demo, I'm going to open VS Code. And let me create a file here. I'm going to call it add.js. And I'm going to create another file called music.js. Now, ideally, if you're using the traditional syntax of require, you would use something to export something. You would use something called module.exports. And you say, I want to export export a function called, or let's export an object, and this object has a property X. No, object. So let's export an X property. That's fine. And let's export, let's say X is private. I don't want to export X. So whenever you define anything inside this file, it's private. And in order to expose that, you can create a method called getX function that is going to return this private X value. And I can create a method called setX in order to change the value of this variable. SetX is just a property which is going to accept a new value. And I'm going to set X to the new value and then return also X. Now, how can I use code like in this file into my app.js? Usually we'll use require syntax. So you will say const music equal require, and then you say .x and then music. And from music, you know that you get access to two things, which is getX and setX. You don't get access to X itself because everything you define is private except anything you provide through module.exports. These two parts, they become public. So as you can see, I can only use the getX and setX. So if we wanna set X with, I'm gonna have X start with 0. So here I'm gonna set X with 6. And I'm going to console log music.getX and also console log music.setX because setX also will return the new value. So I would know that I have set this correctly. Now, if you want to test this code, you would need a terminal and you could say node app.js. And we do have an issue here, which is x equal new value. Assignment to a constant. Yeah, we cannot reassign constant, so I'm gonna define it with let. And as you can see, we started with 0 and then now x is 6. Basic stuff. Now, as I mentioned, require is a legacy way of importing and exporting objects within modules. So we will replace require with a new syntax, which is the import. Now, before I do that, I can also tell you that since I know that what music brings me back, instead of having an object called music here that I can access two properties from, or two methods from, there is a feature in ES6 called destructuring. So what I could do is I could destructure this module and immediately get X and set X references from this module because I know that this module provides me with two methods. So I could destructure these two methods by using the curly brackets to the left side. And now I don't need to mention the music. That's very common shortcut in JavaScript. You will see me using it a lot. Why? Because the right side is an object which has getX, which is a function, and setX, which is a function. So I can destructure this object and immediately get access to getX and setX and use them without the need of, hey, this is music, and now you have to say music.getX and then music.setX. Because I know that music is going to be this object, I can immediately destructure it. Just code thingy shortcut. Now, how do I convert any CommonJS to ESM? VS Code provides you with a bulb here. You see that bulb? If I press on the bulb, there is a tooltip that convert to ESX. And you see immediately it converted to ESX and did the structuring for me. So it's pretty smart. Of course, you can always do, hey, I need music and then music.music. But this is just cleaner code. And now, instead of using module.exports, you do really need to use exports instead. So we have two types of exports. We have default exports. So you say export default, and then you could probably export Y, which is 0 as well. And you can have only one default export in a module. And we import this default export with this syntax. We say import, for example, M from the file that you try to import from, which is, for example, music.js. And you can name it anything because it knows that whatever you add here is going to be the default import. Now, how do I generate multiple exports and import them? To generate multiple exports, you need to just mention exports. And you say export getX without S and export setX, declaration settings. So you can export this function and you can export this function as well with an expression. Now I exported two things plus a default one. How do I import this? And say import, and now I can destructure them. GetX and setX. Same from music.js. Now, probably one difference you notice when we import using ESM syntax is that this is wrong, by the way, this is not a good job. You need to mention the extension because there is no default extension. So we must mention the extension when we use ES6 modules. That was not a good job by VS Code. Now that I have two exports, one default export as well, now this code should run. But when I try to run it, I'm going to fail. And the reason is to use import statements and export statements, you need to rename all your files with MJS. All your files must be renamed with extension MJS. And now you're probably, this is also MJS, that's cool. Now I try to run it. Oh, what happened here? Cannot find module app.js, yeah. You should run app.mjs. And why is not defined? Was asking for why. This one. My code worked with 0 and 6. Everything is working fine. But you're probably now wondering that what if my code requires a lot of dependencies and all of them are written with JS, which is something that you would use in your application. So to rename all your files to have MJS just to use a certain module system probably is a little bit extreme, unless you are sure that you don't need to import any JS files. So how do we resolve an issue where we use the ESM module system without renaming our files? Now we need to use the help of NPM. So as you probably have used NPM before, it's a package manager. And before you start using NPM, you need to generate a descriptor called package.json. So I'm going to do npm init, which is going to ask me a lot of questions. I'm going to answer all of them why with the --y. It's going to answer all the questions with yes. So that will speed up creating package.json for me. And now I can change a property here and say that, as you can see, we have two values for the type. CommonJS is the default value and the new value is module. I'm just going to say here that I am going to use the ESM module system, not CommonJS. Now, without renaming my files still .js, I would run the code and I should run the code successfully. And that's what we are going to use in every single project. Generate a package JSON, change the module system to ESM instead of CommonJS. There's always two values here. Change it to module, and now you can use the new syntax of import and export in your project. Any questions? And there is no difference on how do I use Node, for example, modules. You probably build some web servers or something with Node. And here are a few examples. You know that to import anything from HTTP, you can create server, you can listen on the server, and this is just the normal code that you use to build a web server. To use any core module, you just import from the core module and you use it. URL is going to help you parse any URL that you have, and then you could get an object of that string. So the way you used required before, now you're going to use it with import and export. So this is the legacy code of CommonJS. And basically require, probably you studied also in WAP, that it resolve and load and wrap. Import works in completely different way because all of the dependencies are evaluated at load time, ahead of time, not at execution time. So they are really a lot faster. And all ES modules are asynchronous. All the imports are hoisted. And that's how we use it. Either name your files with MJS or change package JSON with type module, and you are good to have default and named exports and import them using the standard ES6 import from syntax. One more thing to mention that you should always keep in mind is that we require now file extension, as you can see here, file extension. Every single time I'm going to mention the file extension, so don't forget that. And it also, the import, we have a variation of the import, which is, yes, we can have import statement, which is import from. We also have import expression or function, which is import, and you call the import to load something dynamically, and then you add in and you get whatever you have. And it's pretty common when you use the method import is to wait for that method because it's asynchronous. We will not be using this one because we want to require files before we use them, and we will use the import statement instead. But you will see the import expression or function later in the third week, while Angular needs to import modules dynamically based on their user request. So we will see both syntax at some point in the course. Any questions? Let's talk now about the third-party dependencies. So core dependencies, easy to import and use. User dependencies are easy to create and then use. Now, what about the third-party modules? So let's demo all three types of them. Remember, before you use any third-party dependency, you need to create package JSON. So npm init is a must before you start installing any dependency. Let's install a code dependency and try to use it. In order to find any code dependency or package or development dependency or global dependency, you probably need to go to npmjs.com. And this is the place where you find all dependencies published in this directory. So let's try to find something that will allow me to format date format. I see there is a package called moment, which is very famous. Now, not every package you find on NPM you should just add to your code. This is going to be part of your code, part of your project. So if it's not trusted, you might have some vulnerability in your project. So good things to keep your eyes on is, first of all, they will tell you how to install the dependency. So I can copy this line, go back to the command line, and install a dependency. Now, at the end of the installation, I see that 0 vulnerabilities were found. So this is first good indication that no one reported any bugs or issues. Plus, the internal NPM check found 0 vulnerabilities. So this is a good indication that this moment package is trusted. Another indication I always look for is number of downloads. And I see that this package has around 17.5 million downloads per week. So pretty much it's trusted package between every single project out there, and I would feel comfortable using it. Now, how do you use a dependency? First, you install the dependency. Second, you read the documentation. And here they tell you, where's the documentation? Let's go to the home page. Yep. So basically, you need to import moment and start using it. Okay. So in order to use this thing, okay, let's try to use it in our project. So here is app. I'm going to import moment from moment. And then I'm going to console.log. This. Okay, let's test this code. Oh, I installed moment again. So when I installed moment, probably you noticed before we test the code, you noticed some changes here in the directory. So what are these changes? First, we notice a folder called node modules. This is where moment lives there, of the source code of moment. And we see a new file created called package-lock.json. And you will see that package.json was updated. So let's take a look at all of three before I run the code and show the time. So the first change is package.json, and package.json now has an entry called dependencies with the dependency name and the version. And we see that the version has 3 parts or 4 parts. There is a symbol here, and then this is the number for major release, and there is a number for minor release, and the third number is for patch. And this is the standard for semantic versioning. Basically, if the developer fix a bug, they will increment the patch. If they add new feature, they will implement the minor. And if they release breaking changes or really new features that might break your current code, changes to the API, they will increment the major number. Now we have also a symbol, which is most of the time you will see it either with caret or with tilde. A caret means update the minor and patch, and a tilde means update the patch only. So it is always safe to update your dependencies using npm update command, and that will always scan all your dependencies with the online version, the new release. And since I have here caret, if there was any patches or minor changes online, I will download them and patch all the dependencies in most folders, which is nice. Some packages you probably you want to use tilde. Some packages you probably need to use exact version, so you remove this symbol. And if you don't care about the symbol, just use a star. But it is not recommended because updating to any new major release might break your code. So it's always you that we're going to force a new release after you read documentation how to update from a release to another major release. Now, if we open the folder node underscore modules, we will see moment. It lives there. That's good. And if moment did have any other dependencies, you will also see them there. And to give you an example for that, I can install, for example, Express, which is something we will use tomorrow. So npm install Express. And you will see that a lot of dependencies were downloaded because Express framework has a lot of dependencies. So all of them live in here. And package.json will only state your dependencies, not what dependencies these dependencies depend on. It's a good practice every single time you start a project and you generate a package.json is to do the following. The first step is to create a .gitignore file, and you add the node underscore modules folder to it. Why we do that? Because at any point you will need to send this code to a remote repository, your homework, a project, GitHub. In order to do that, you don't want to send node underscore modules folder. This folder easily become big, and it has a lot of things that you shouldn't really keep locally in your projects. So we want to send everything but this file. And any developer who needs to run this code, all they need to do is to npm install again. All the dependencies will be downloaded again, and you can run the project. Now let's run the code. I see that the time was successfully printed, so I know that now moment is working just fine as we expected. Now, the last thing I can mention with code dependencies is what happens inside package-log.json. What is this file and why it is important that we keep it with package.json all the time. So let's say you have a development environment and you have production environment. Let's say we don't have package-log and you installed Express and you installed Moment. Look at them. So the current version of these two is 4.18.2 and 2.29.4. You're testing everything and you're happy and your code is beautifully working. Now, for some reason, when you took this code online to the production environment and you install these dependencies, now you notice here that we have caret. This caret means update any minor or patch. So let's say in the production, we installed 4.19.0 and 2.32.5, completely two different versions. Now, why this is bad or risky? Because now you have mismatch between your production and development. So the test that you run here might fail here. there is a big chance that something failing in the development, working in a production, or failing in production and working in development. So what you really need is to have exact versions when you run npm install in production. And that's the job of package lock.json file. Inside this file, you have all the precise, exact versions that were used for Express and Moment and all their dependencies as well. So when you run npm install in any other machine, you, instead of checking the caret estimate updated versions, npm install will look inside package lock, read all the exact versions, and install the exact versions that were installed, so 4.18.2 and 2.29.4. So that's the job of package lock.json. So if I want to look at inside of it, you will see that most of the versions are specified as exact numbers and how they were installed, what is their dependencies, etc. This way, all projects must include both of them to avoid any version mismatch between two different machines. So that's the job of package lock.json. Any questions? So we learned about third-party code dependency. We install it, we add it to our project, and we use it. Let's give you an example of a development dependency. And an example of a development dependency, I would say NodeMon. NodeMon is just a tool that will restart my server when I make changes. Okay, so npm install NodeMon minus development dependency. Now you will see that package.json will be updated, and I will have an entry called def dependencies and has NodeMon in it. Let me create a script to run the script using NodeMon. I will go to package.json, go to script, I will hear it out, and then create a new script. I'm going to call it start. And when I run this script, I need to run this command, nodemon app.js. Now I can run the script by its name, which is start, in order to run this command. Easier to type. So I can say npm run start scripts. Now you will see that my web server worked, not what my web server, my script ran, and it's watching for changes. So at any time I change something and I save, it restarts and run the code again, which is pretty helpful tool while we are doing development to restart the execution of your code every time you make changes. So that's an example of a development dependency, NodeMon. And finally, let me give you an example of a global dependency. And before I do the global dependency, see NodeMon, it's installed here as well. Here it is NodeMon. So also development dependencies are added to Node modules folder. Now the third type of third-party dependencies is, as we explained, global ones. And global ones will not be here. I cannot import them, and they only provide me with tools. And an example for that is something that we will use very soon, which is npm install the Angular CLI dependency. And I install this with -g because it's a global dependency. And when I do that, if I check Node modules folder, I don't see it in here. There was an issue with. Oh, so I'm using a Mac machine here, and with the Mac machine, I'm not allowed to install global dependency without admin permission. So I failed. So in case you have a Mac machine, make sure you add sudo to the command. So I'm gonna run the same command with sudo, which is run the command with admin root privilege. Now I'm gonna add my password, and now I should be successfully installed Angular CLI. Good, all of them worked. It's not added here, but now I have a new command called ng. I can say ng version, and yes, it worked. It shows me the version of the current CLI. So that's an example of a global dependency. It gives you a new command. In this case, it's ng here that I can use, we will be using in the couple of weeks to generate and to provide tooling to our Angular application. So these are all types of modules in Node. Any questions?
Professor, I have a questions on package JSON. Since all the version has been logged on package log JSON, so you mentioned that to run this application to any other machine, we require this to JSON. So my question
Yes.
is that since in the production we only, the package log JSON is enough. So why we are required to JSON file there?
What's the question again?
My question is why we are required to JSON file in the production since all the version has been locked on the package block JSON. So for the production, we are required to have this to JSON file.
Yes, because the package JSON file is usually the source that declare your dependencies. The package lock is only to lock the versions. So you don't just send package lock. You need both package JSON and package lock. They work together. But I cannot send package lock, but there is a risk that I run into a problem, which is mismatch in versions. But you still need package JSON. Why? Because this is where you define your dependencies, development dependencies, the type of your project, if it's using CommonJS or module, ESM modules. You need to define all your scripts that you run to run tests and start in development and compile. So you do need package JSON in your project. The package lock is just accompanying the package.json, which is helping the npm update or install. So when you do that, you always use the exact versions that were defined in package.json. So that's basically why you need both of them. Is that clear?
Okay. Yes.
Good. Any other questions?
So if we build the production version, then that time are we required to have the type, like type module?
Basically, yes, because when I'm running here my code, I'm saying, hey, I'm gonna run Node on app.js, and app.js is using import. And now if I removed module here and try to run the code,
No, I'm asking if we make a production patch that time, are we good?
cannot use import outside a module. So I immediately failed. And it tells you what to do. To load an ES module, set the type module in package.json or use extension.mjs. So I didn't hear what you were saying. Can you repeat?
My question is then when we build the production patch, I mean the
I still need some more
sorry.
context. Yeah.
I when we will build the application on the production, that time we are required to build a patch for this application. And the build project.
I see your point. Usually we don't build backend applications. We send this entire code to the web backend server. Now, if you would like to build the application, which is like probably what you mean by building is bundling the files, right, into a single file, you could do that, and then you don't need package.json and package.log.json because you are sending a single JavaScript file that's already combining all your code together.
Yes.
It's less common for the backend application. However, it's very common for the front-end application because what you want to send to the browser is probably 1 or 2 JavaScript files that need to run instead of sending the browser 100 files to fetch and run.
I see. Thank you, Prof.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Professor.
Yes.
So I have already downloaded my Node.js in my laptop, the latest version, and then I try to follow up like with the new classes and stuff. And then the version difference gives me a deprecation problem. So I can just change into the package.json, the version. How does it work? I just downloaded the whatever I following the material into my VS Code, and does it comes with their version with the log, and then when I install in PM, and then the version difference comes, right?
How about I connect with you sometime afternoon, and we can check your Node version. First of all, I will check. I would like to know your operating system, then your Node version and how you installed it, and what kind of version mismatch or deprecation you're facing. That will help me fix the issue for you. If anybody is facing similar issues, please reach out to me after the class, and I can help you resolve all of these issues. So you could follow up the same what we're doing in the class. I'll help you out afternoon. Sure. Any other questions about Node modules?